Hey,
Morning, how's it going?
good, good.
Hey everyone. Um, yeah, so we didn't meet last week. The week before that, we were talking about Matt's concerns with the proposal that we had. So to review that, let me share my screen. Oh yeah, yeah, and also some updates. I know that Yakov has still been doing a lot of work on his implementation, and he also has a PR with spec edits that matches implementation. Unfortunately, I've just been really busy and haven't been able to look much at either one, but that's really exciting, and I want to take a look at those. Yeah, so Matt brought up last time about his main concern was a lot of list traversal to figure out on the client like uh, how the pieces of the response fit together. And I think I just made like a few examples to try and show what that looks like. We talked a bunch about putting some data in line in the actual data object here. That has some concerns with how do you distinguish it from real data? That's like kind of a new precedent in GraphQL that I'm a little hesitant to take on. So this was what he originally said, but he said that there was a mistake that the path should be represented as a tree so that it could be traversed together with the data. And in this response, the IDs that we had change from pointing specifically representing a combination, a defer instance, like a combination of this defer at this path with this label, and instead represent one piece of the incremental data. So, and that allows a new a new incremental piece to point to another piece of data, and so you could follow them through to get all of them. My concern was like, how do we know when if now the IDs refer to the individual incrementals, how do we know when a whole defer fragment has been delivered? So that might be solvable here, but I'm not sure if it is in this form. Yakov had a proposal where it kind of now there's like two sets of IDs. There's one for the incremental data, and there's another for the deferred fragments, and it uses pending is now like mirrors data, but uses the minus sign or some other characters to represent where the insertion points of the defers are. And my concern with this one is that it reduces the readability of the response. Like GraphQL has a very readable response now, but this is a bit more abstract. I tried to come up with another solution that uses an array to show the tree. This one would basically be almost the same as what we had in the gist proposal, but the pending is a tree of arrays. I'm not super happy with this either. I think it's a little confusing, but this would let you traverse both at the same time and find where the defers are. And so it's kind of like the first element in the array is the name of the key, and then the other elements would be children inside of it. So this one, you don't need to have any syntax, any special strings or characters inside an object to know that these keys are special. I think it also affects the readability a bit though. And just to show like some other examples, you would also have pending inside of incremental once you come across another defer inside of the original one, so you can get the ID for additional pendings. And I think this would also work with stream, where you could have kind of the same thing. But yeah, I don't know, just kind of want to hear what everyone's thoughts are.
I'm not keen on requiring clients to traverse trees when they don't really need to. Like, I'd rather have a top level path that says, you need to traverse now to do a thing. But if there is no path, then you don't need to do anything, kind of thing. A bit like errors. Like, you don't have to walk through the entire tree looking for an error location. You just get a list of errors at the end and they tell you where they belong.
So that means what was in the original proposal in the gist?
Yeah, I mean, that's one solution for it. But even with Matt's proposals, Matt said we could still achieve the same thing with our inline elements, but instead by having paths marked up, they just need to be marked up in the right way. I'm not keen to require traversal. Like, for many clients that speak native JSON, like, they will take JSON and they will turn it into an object structure. And if there is no incremental, then they can just use that object verbatim. They don't need to walk through it, scan through it, and see if there's anything missing. And I think with incremental, it should be as simple as just like looking at a top level property. If it's there, then I have to do a little bit more work. But I'm being told explicitly what to do with these, 3 placeholders or whatever, rather than having to traverse the entire tree to look to see if there's any specially named property on any of those objects. And of course,
Sorry,
the other issue.
Could you yeah, could you just repeat that again? I didn't follow. Meaning, if is it okay if I ask you to do that? To just that why would it be?
Yeah, so what I was saying was effectively, I don't think that we should require a client to walk through every object and every list and every object within those lists and so on and so forth to find out where things need to be attached, especially in the case where there may not be anything that needs to be attached. They're effectively doing a bunch of work for no reason. And that's certainly not the kind of thing that you'd want to do in like a React render loop. It'd be much better to just say, here are the paths at which things are coming later. And then if you need to traverse at that point, that's fine, because you've been given the explicit path. You don't have to traverse over every single property of every single object in every single list in the entire response. You just attach things at the given locations. But we also open ourselves to the custom scalar problem that Ivan's mentioned a few times, which is if we are putting things in line and traversing to find them, then the client won't know whether that thing is something that is just part of like a custom JSON scalar, or whether it is something significant to stream and defer.
I mean, I think
about what point? Do you hear me right? I didn't test my setup. Is it okay, right? So this can be solved by, I think, Matt at some point was this idea. I don't remember who actually came up with it, but you can embed stuff if inside that stuff you explicitly validate that reference. Basically, if you reference something and inside stuff that you reference, you will have a path to a place where you reference it at. You can do validation in the client. So I think there is a solution, and it's pretty good solution in general.
So that would mean like you have both the inline pointer in the data, but then also the list of paths that say these are the valid places for the inline pointer.
I would say like for both for for clients and for people reading it, it would be easier if it's not a list but a map of stuff. So for example, we use like, I don't know, whatever, like ampersand 1 as a reference. And if you go to list of like, and we use top level references thing, and if you go into like if you see at 1, like some special syntax mentioning 1, and you go into references and you cannot find 1, it's not valid reference, you find 1, and inside 1 you have a different path than that's the path that the reference was used into. It's also not passing validation. So, and since GraphQL is like a tree, GraphQL response is a tree, you shouldn't be able to use it at multiple places. Or even if you can use it multiple places, you can have paths as array. So you can validate it by having in a stuff that you reference. You can validate places where you reference it. Basically, yeah, I will try to come up and put example in the chat, but yeah, I think it's good enough solution for that problem.
For what it's worth, I think, I mean, I have to look at it more closely just to make sure, but I think it looks like Rob's proposal achieves basically the same thing as my special character proposal, but I think I agree that it's it does have some readability concerns, but it looks more readable than mine. And so I think just looking at it from the first get-go, I think I would prefer it, but I just have to make sure that it's equivalent in terms of all. But it looks basically different ways of packaging the tree, but it looks basically like a similar tree-like structure. Also, like I was saying in the chat, I'm not sure how organizing all these items in the lit. If I understand correctly, I guess the problem is whether we're using IDs instead of paths. I mean, the proposal I had, I guess I still retain the ability to use IDs, so there should be, it should be equivalent in terms of expense for the clients, but that does sacrifice readability. So but I mean, maybe should we take a step back? I mean, are we all convinced to some extent that by Matt's main feedback that we should be providing a way to to simply build up the duplicated payload? I mean, are we all finding that convincing? And just the question is how to do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm convinced by it. This was an attempt to see like what maybe could be the most minimal change to that gist while satisfying his requirements.
Rob, what would your proposal look like with an array in here, like a list, sorry?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. This is really just a very, very rough draft. I haven't had time to really think through too much of it.
I think it would probably still work the same. Effectively, you're looking at the entries, and if they're a string, then walk on. If they're an object, then that's the defer thing. And then I guess you would just have, if they're an array, then you'd walk on again. It's just this time it's an array rather than a string.
Right, yeah, this should like really like following the elements in that array should give you the same as what the path is, and we have numbers in the path for that, so I guess that could work.
I posted in the chat what I was talking about because you mentioned that I said you cannot embed a magic syntax inside the data, but I like brought example where you can if you open the chat, it's like example
basically because you use a spread operator as a field denominator, right?
Like spread operator, you can use like plus,
yeah, well, whatever,
ampersand, whatever. You can reference individual fields. You can reference group fields. It's not my idea. It's not about particular syntax. I just came up with some syntax in matter of like 1 minute. General idea is that if you reference somewhere from inside data, you need to distinguish two cases. One case is like legit reference. Another case is like random data inside custom scholars. To differentiate with two cases, you need to follow a reference and check path inside the reference. If path inside the reference matches place where you use a magic syntax is valid. If you follow a reference and when you follow it and there is like nothing there, or like path different, or like reference is not existing, it's mean like this is like random data inside custom scholars that intentionally or unintentionally look like a magic syntax. Just because like Rob's point, sorry for making it convoluted and couple of threads inside this discussion, but Rob said like to make this syntax more readable, it would be ideal to reference it inside the data itself, but it's blocked by the fact that you can use the same syntax inside custom scholars. So with mechanism, I want to use magic syntax. Just wanted to make that so like people can figure out. Yeah, like as Ben just said, it can reference like a pending. It's not. It can do whatever like variation. In general, it's like I think it's a good solution for figuring out like magic syntax problem. And this will make format readable. Person who reads it manually don't need to do like do magic in their head, or like I don't know if clients will also don't need to track like paths. They need to track path, but they don't need to traverse and check like constantly checking incremental. Only when they see magic syntax, they need to look somewhere in pending or inside incremental, inside something, and they need to track path to validate reference. Yeah, and we don't need escaping in that case. Yeah.
In my opinion, the magic syntax is a strike against readability too, because it's like, because right now, you know, the data is always like a mirror of what pretty much of what the request is, and having extra stuff in there, I think is a pretty big compromise to make in GraphQL. Like I would rather have it in a parallel tree just for the fact that when you see data, you know that it's data and not
And
metadata mixed in with data. I could be convinced otherwise, but
I'm not sure yet. While I agree on that in general, Rob, it also, like from a debuggability standpoint, it's much easier, right? Like I'm actually also thinking about the same. Until now, data was always a one-to-one representation, but debuggability wise, it looks really nice. Like you understand how this patch tree works and where it points to and stuff. So I'm not sure yet.
yeah, basically, I'm worried that some GraphQL client somewhere is going to take this data, even though it may be an
Yeah.
incremental payload, and just hand it off to a client to render it. And then you see things like, our metadata rendered inside components.
But is that really high risk? Because like the transport at the moment would be a multi-part response or a SSE response. So you cannot just take it and
Yeah.
so there would be a gap. I'm not saying that I'm yet fighting for something like this, but it also like it's an intriguing idea because now you have a nice. I mean, you can reach that with two trees, but like also merging trees always has a mental overhead.
Want to mention that I think it's like both sides is valid. Like for example, if you look at YAML have references, and it's part of one. Not many people use it, but it's part of the language. It's pretty usual. In like not in YAML config, but like some people use it. And since we don't use like YAML, if we use YAML, everything, yeah. So basically, like I think it's a new concept, and because previous mental model was you only have like pure JSON inside the data, it's adding special stuff inside change mental model, and it's not necessary. Like it's like surprising because it's new. I would say because GraphQL is established technology and it's new mental model. Is it worth to change mental model? I don't know. I just wanted to add like it is an ingredient into proposals. So people working on proposals can use it like ingredient in the special mixture of like solution to stream differ.
Rob, in the proposal that you're suggesting, would you still have, see if I can look at the screen, would you still use the shorthand of the ID to, like, I see you don't have IDs in the, oh no, you do have IDs in the pending. So would you still use that shorthand to shorten the list in terms of the path, to shorten the path in some of the responses? Or do you think that, did you
Well, I
take
was
that
thinking
out?
that once you know what the ID is, you probably want to quickly scan the incremental and find all the ones that are matching it, so that it would be beneficial to have all of the IDs tagged on there, which then means that you can't shorten the path. I mean, I guess you could if you figure out like a common ancestor of them, but for simplicity, I did not put that there.
I'm just looking at your solution. So I think that in mine, I also had in the incremental the same path-like structure with special characters. I mean, you could do it with arrays. And I also retained the ability to shorten the path with the IDs. I think that combination in particular makes it very not readable. Meaning, I wonder if in my tree example, or if in your tree example, would still be kind of readable, but it would still be more readable if we didn't have both of those. Now, both of those I think are helpful, but you know, to the client. But yeah, but I think that combination in particular might be more efficient, but really not so readable.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with Benji that this syntax is cumbersome. But yeah, like I said, I just wanted something that was less of a divergence from the original proposal than what you propose, Yakov. And so
But I think Matt's concern for the, I mean, I don't want to speak for him considering he's not here, but I think he was saying how you're going to have to do, I can remembering him vaguely saying, you know, you have to do all these incremental path tree walks that are sort of unnecessary. So I think that applies to the incremental section, maybe even more than the pending, because there could be even more incremental items, right, per payload than there are of pending. So I think it would be, you know, from his perspective, or from that point's perspective, it would be beneficial to have a tree-like structure within incremental as well.
yeah, so I did put that in here.
That's within the pending section, but I'm saying even within the, meaning when pendings show up in incremental, right? When you have additional pendings, you're doing it. But I think even when you have multiple incremental payloads, meaning we're saying the client is expected to update the tree multiple times, and they're going to need to do it at different locations. So why should they have to walk, you know, the tree each time from the root? We should bunch those or group them together.
I was thinking that if their client is already walking through all the data, then wherever you're walking data, you would also in parallel walk through the pending in the same way to see where they are. And so maybe I'm not understanding what you're saying, but I think like, so as you walk through foo, you're also walking through pending here, and you find this this defer ID. And now when you're walking through this incremental to process it, you would also, I think I did this wrong. There should be another layer in here with bar, but you would go into bar, into Baz, and then find, no, this actually should just be bar, not Baz. That's the error here. And that's where you would find the, no, that's still wrong. This example isn't right.
I guess what I'm saying
Yeah.
on from the gist comment that I have a few examples, and I agree that the format that I have is not readable with those special characters and the IDs shortening the paths. But basically, whenever you have an incremental, an individual payload with more than one item in the incremental that's being delivered, more than one incremental data item, if you can group them together by path, it would be beneficial to do so. Like what I see in your example is when you have one incremental that spawns maybe multiple pendings, but not when you have more than one incremental that's fulfilling at the same time. But maybe I'm not looking in the right place.
Can you just repeat that last part again?
So if you take a look at the last example from my gist, the gist that your gist, and then the comment that I have there, like the last example, I'm not even looking at the whole thing, but in that
This
last
one?
example, the last payload sends 2 incremental items, potential slow field A, and it also sends F.
Yeah.
And they both, are grouped together at, path, at the path of R1. It's shortened to the path of R1, which if we look up further, to where it was said that it was pending, we know is AB. Like that's the path of R1. So even if you don't shorten it, and if you use arrays instead of my equal special characters, I think according to the philosophy that we want to reduce tree walks, we would want to group those payloads I0 and I1 together in some way, in some tree-like structure, so that the client knows, okay, we can start from R1, or maybe even start from the root, go down to AB, and then insert in that, further from that, depending on whatever additional paths might be there in I0 and I1, or in this case, it's just, there is no additional path. They just insert 2 things at I0, I1. So, I mean, I just think that tree-like structure is good. If it's good for pending, it's also good for incremental.
Right, I see.
I don't know. I'm not saying it's worth it. I'm just saying whatever benefit that it gives us, we have to weigh against whatever cost there is, but it's sort of like the same or a similar trade-off issue. Overall, like, I think that's just different ways of packaging the same information. So taking a step back, like I think we're in a overall good place. And Matt, I guess I'm leaning more toward Matt's suggestion of giving additional information so that it's really easy for clients to put together a non-deduplicated payload, like if that, an immutable object, like I sort of see that point. To me, and hopefully we can get to, but again, I guess we have to come up with some structure and compare it. So I guess the details are kind of important, but.
Matt's not here, but one of the things I'd love to know is whether he only cares about stitching together the various fragments that were referred to at that level, or whether he wants effectively the final object value at that level, respecting all of the fragments, not necessarily just the ones that the component itself has specified, because those are 2 quite different problems. If it's only the ones that the component itself cares about, then you know fragment spread at that level you care about. Fragment spread at a higher level, closer to the root of the query, those are kind of irrelevant. And part of this is the issue of like those root level queries needing to be merged. They would each need to be traversed separately if you are rendering something that's like a.b.c. But if the component only cares about fragments spread within its own a.b.c and doesn't care about a.b.c's that have come from elsewhere, then the problem gets a bit simpler, because we already know that we're going to be giving each of those deferred fragments their own ID. We just need to track those and give them to the component effectively. Well, basically, another way of expressing that, does Matt want an algorithm where you give it the list of incremental payloads and a path, a.b.c, and you get the final object? Or does he want an algorithm where you give it the list of incrementals and the fragment name and the path, so that you only worry about resolving that one particular fragment at that position?
I imagine it would be the latter, if I understand correctly, because you only care, he only wants to answer like what the component wants to answer, meaning not just an arbitrary question on the graph. Or not to put words in his mouth, that's what I think we should shoot for.
I certainly think that's probably what Relay cares about.
What do we think are our next steps? Yeah, I mean, it is of course hard to theorize what Matt wants without him being here. So I can reach out to him and see if he can make it to the next meeting.
Maybe it's like, yeah, I agree with Rob. If you mention in Matt opinion so much in these discussions, maybe it's worth to, like, I don't know if he can join or not, but maybe he can write like his thought dump at least, because like it's incorrect to reference something just from what I heard like a month ago. It's not, I'm not totally sure that I remember correctly, and like, yeah, so my idea of what Matt says can be different from like Yakov or Benji. So if Matt cannot join. I think like as a person who had the strongest opinion about the last proposal we present on the last working group, it's like in a sense his obligation to write it. And I think written form is even better than ask him to join, because like he will join one particular meeting, but in next meeting we will also have discussion about those points. So I don't know what would be better. It's probably up to him to decide if it's separate document or he need to add like additional requirement or restriction. I forget how it's called in a champion document that Rob created. But yeah, I'm waiting for making it written.
Or
And
maybe
public.
it's maybe it
Yeah,
can be stuff that goes on
solution.
the solution criteria.
Yeah. Maybe it's too restrictive. I don't know. Yeah, my idea is up to him to decide, but it should be written somewhere.
All right, I'll reach out to him this week. Wonder, Benoit, I wonder, like, have you been able to try and implement some client work on like this original proposal? Did you run into any of the issues that Matt was mentioning?
I'm sorry, no.
Yeah, that's fine.
No, I got caught up on other things, and yeah.
Right, anything else that we want to talk about in this meeting?
I just want to encourage everyone, if they're able to take a look at those specification edits. It might help expedite, I guess, things in terms of review of the implementation. And I'm happy to walk anybody through that, through the code changes or the spec edits. They're kind of extensive, but I think, and they definitely, the spec edits in particular, are a particular approach, meaning it would be simpler if we presented the spec as not delaying execution of the defers until the initial result is done. And then, but what these spec edits do is follow the algorithm where we allow defers to they're deferred, but they are execute semi-concurrently as much as possible, like it's a node, and so it shows how that can be managed, and where the state for that, the state of the publisher and the different executions, where all that is held and how it's modified. And so I tried to isolate that to a particular subset of the algorithms. And so if anyone wants to talk to me about that more or go over more with the specific goal of hoping to get the implementation merged, I'd be happy to do that separately.
Yeah, it's been a super busy week for me, but I really want to start getting into those spec edits. I'm hoping that I can do that this week. All right. So if that's it, I'll see you all next week.
See you.
All right. Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.